Hi, everyone, and welcome to My First Signal, the only show where we invite seasoned revenue drivers to discover the practical side of designing a signal based go to market engine for the first time under 30 minutes. My name is Georgi, co founder and CEO of Signalbase. Now, let's get practical. Okay, you can see that obviously I've been practicing this intro quite a few times over the past podcast episodes. Hi everyone, welcome to the first ever LinkedIn Live that we are doing within Signalbase, and it's my absolute pleasure to share the quote unquote small anniversary of the podcast number 10, with Francesco, who is by far one of the most skilled go-to-market practitioners that I've recently stumbled across. So, Francesco, extremely nice to have you on the podcast, man. It's my absolute pleasure.
I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for having me, Georgie. Hope this lives up to the chat. We're going to cover some really fun stuff today.
Absolutely, absolutely. And actually, the reason why we wanted to make this in this untraditional setup for the podcast is due to a few things. I feel like everyone's been feeling the shifts that are happening, right? Signal layers, data layers, agents talking to agents, etc., etc., and it feels very scary,
Yeah.
especially for those who cannot really keep up with absolutely everything that is going on. So hopefully by the end of this podcast, you'll be able to identify the trend for yourself and start thinking not only tactically on which to jump, but actually strategically too. Before giving the stage to Francesco, initially, what we're going to do today, really quickly, like an overview, we're going to talk about the changes that are happening on the market. We're going to look into, as we promised, building an agentic signal-based system, and then we'll also learn how to put this directly into your go-to-market engine. So, without any further ado, Francesco, go and take it, man.
Georgie. All right. I know you usually don't put slides up, but I just want to frame the way that we're going through this. And overall, yeah, what are we seeing right now? We've been coming from this history of human-led orchestration, right? Where you've got your person, your go-to-market professional, whatever they may be, whatever capacity they're working in, and they're hunting for data, they're pulling things in, they're putting it into their CRM, navigating it, they're putting in notes, this and that, and they have some help with tools, but it's not fully fledged out. And of course, now we're going through this progression, and oh man, where did I put that? We're going through this progression to from human led to, what should I call it, to system led orchestration. And that is, like, you have these tools, they're rule based, they are like this if this then that logic is in them, but they're brittle and they still require a lot of human input. And now what we're looking at is, like, I see what you're doing with Signalbase, and this is going to tie in really well with this, because we're not dealing with so much like a user going in and going through a dashboard and seeing a UI and navigating that, so that again they're pulling information out of that and they're putting it into their CRM. And we're not even so much talking about today the stage where these things are connected to your CRM and there's some kind of systemic orchestration going on. What we're talking about today is the next layer, which is agentic, which is where you have these systems that they have their kind of instructions. They're goal oriented and they're thinking about, okay, this is what we're trying to achieve. And then from what we're trying to achieve, how do we back our way into the system, the process? And they use the tools that are available to them in order to execute on that. And so, right, this explosion of OpenClaw, and all of a sudden OpenAI is all over it, and Claude Code comes out with Dispatch, and Perplexity is coming out with Computer, and this and that. There are so many ways now to tell your agent to do something, and it just goes and does it. The concern there in navigating this change from human led to system led to agentic systems. The challenge there, I think, is in trust and implementing changes like this, like navigating this change. Let's say we're talking about a traditional like manufacturing company who very much still has everything that's human led, right? They're doing something very manual. Their operations are all very like copy paste. Navigating that from there to an agentic system or even an autonomous system, which we're not going to get into today, that that requires a big jump in trust. And when you talk to people leading those kinds of companies, what's happening there is you're going to face resistance, and rightfully so, right? Because these things need to be tested, they need to be proven. It's still very much the Wild West. And even these people may be in a place where system led orchestration or automation, like this is still a scary world for them. So,
Totally. It's just to jump on this one really quickly. We've been chatting a lot about agentic go to market, right?
yeah,
And everything happened so fast too, right?
yeah,
This is just a small remark. It felt like everything happened extremely fast and people barely managed to catch up with absolutely everything that is happening. And something that you mentioned within one of our conversations recently is that it actually good that so many people did not caught up because they skipped the technicalities and now they can benefit from the easy access to absolutely
right,
everything. So now it's becoming more friendly. Like the interface is becoming more friendly. The executional layers are becoming more friendly to those who skip the initial first wave of education. And now, because of that whole movement, agent to agent, you just need to think very strategically. So I'm curious, like, how that take us further into the future too.
so no matter what you are doing, you have to start with a good use case. Have a good use case. If you, like me, are you're a solo founder, you're a solo operator, and what we were talking about in that conversation was I got super busy and then I'm in this situation where I'm like stranded in London. I got a million things to figure out. I fell behind. I felt behind. And to a certain extent, right? This blow up with Claude Code and everything, like it's still taking me like a little bit to catch up to get back onto that train. So I don't feel as technically fleshed out as I look out and everybody's talking about all the things that they're implementing. So now I'm
Yeah,
coming back into it. And what's happening is I'm like, I don't know. I have this agent who lives in my Slack, which lives in my Slack. And I said, you know what? I hear you could do anything. Let's try it out. And I give it my context. It says, all right, connect me to this source with API, connect me to your context with that. And anybody else having streaming issues?
yeah, that's good.
Oh,
I would check it. I would check it. No worries.
because I have prospects I want to reach out to. I have context in my Notion. I have a Signalbase API, and I know exactly the playbook that I want to run. What if an agent could do it for me? And that's my use case, right? Is how do I streamline my go to market motions? But I do that with full context. I do that with the right messaging. I do that to the right person at the right time. And I do that in a way that's at my scale personally. So come in with a use case and have that kind of scaled to exactly the way that you operate. For me, as a solo operator, that's what I need. And I really believe in starting small. So even if I were to want to take this and then scale it up, let's take this and go implement it. And there are other systems that do that, and we'll touch on those. But always start small. So start with your strategy, start with your reason for doing this, have a solid use case, and then build it to your scale in a small way and start like testing and iterating on it and finding out like what are the systems. So anyway, what this agent did for me was just killed it. It nailed the whole thing. And that's like the first part of what I'm excited to share.
Sick thing. And by the way, checking the chat now, we're back, so that will be great. Okay, shall we talk, by the way, really quickly before we jump into the actual use case? What are
Yep.
some of the main mistakes that you came across? Number one, from all of the people that you are currently talking to. And number two, like, what are some of the mistakes that you personally came across when trying to build this?
Yeah. Coming in without, I think just coming in without any kind of consideration for your strategy, for your, if you haven't, let's say something really simple, right? It's like you haven't defined your ICP, then you're just going to be blowing all of these credits, blowing all of these tests on something that eventually is not going to drive you a lot of value, if any. So that's one thing. I think really simple that we're doing a lot better, I think, about with education. Hey, this is going to get really expensive really fast if you don't have these things predefined.
Hmm.
So, yeah, yeah. I'd say that first and foremost. What about you?
I would say the fact that you try to pull in absolutely every new tool that you come across into that agentic system without testing it prematurely for a different use case. Because initially, what happens then is the fact that you plug in something brand new, right, into the
Mm,
system that is already working. So the opportunity for it to stop working is actually quite high because of the fact that you haven't really tested it. So the main learning I would say is do a role, run somewhere else, or do an MVP of that initial automation, and then plug it inside of the mother agent or things like this in order to have sufficient results. Because if not, as we mentioned, you're going to burn credits trying to error proof it, etc., etc. So I
mhm.
think that's a very solid practice in place. All right, I think we talked enough about maybe the movements. Sorry.
Maybe one more I think is really critical to talk about is, first of all, not having it strategized. We talked about that. And then one more I'd like to add is not having it planned and architected. And that this ties into what you were saying. You brought this to mind for me is not having it architected. Having a map of your current process, your current way of doing things, the current tools, the current systems that are doing it, whether you're doing it from right that human-led orchestrated way, or whether you're doing it like somewhere in a hybrid of human and system, and maybe you've even started to touch on agentic. If you don't have it mapped, right, your current state, and then you don't kind of do this step-by-step change where you say, okay, here's where we're going to fit this tool in because it has this capability and it's going to replace these processes and it's going to realize this value, streamlining the process. There's just going to be a lot of, you run into a lot of problems with not architecting it first and testing out the way that it's going to look. And if you don't in the end like document your process that it ends up being, even if it's agentic, right? Like where's the logic that went into it? It's this ties into the change management. It ties into the trust and being able to implement it. It ties into the transparency and it ties into not having, right, yet another system, which now is not just compounding your previous technical debt, but it's not even institutional knowledge. It's this black box system that is operating there. So by all means, architect ahead of time, architect your current process, your current mapping, and then map out what it looks like when you make those changes.
For sure. And a small tip here from a guy that actually deals with a lot of data sourcing, make sure that you also contextualize your data because data is only useful in a matter of how you're using it, which we're going to take into consideration actually right now. But yeah, make sure that you don't only get the data, you need to also pay attention that it's verified and contextualized into your whole map because if not, it's just another shiny object in that
Right.
sense. Okay, cool. Shall we move then to the main part of the episode, which is building that agentic system?
Yeah, and I want to do this in two parts. I want to show what it started out with for myself. And this was a kind of a personal exercise where this is just my foray into a research and development style exercise. And so I said, okay, I want you to run a demo with this. And so I'm going to show on my screen a live environment. Hopefully, I'm not exposing any information here.
We can cut this, no worries. Oh, good.
Okay, share screen, entire screen.
Nice. And I'm adding it to stage. There you go. Folks, let us know in the chat if you can see the screen. If not, I'll just take out myself.
Okay, in Slack here, I want to draw your attention to the right side over here. And this is an agent called Viktor. You can find it at victor.ai, I believe. It's run by the crew who also founded Jace. So I heard about them and I thought, I need a safe way to dip my toe into this whole OpenClaw craze, right? I need an agent that can do just about anything, and I just want to test it out in a safe way. Heard that Viktor has very high standards for security, for privacy, for stability. So I thought, all right, this is how I'm going to start it. So I've been working with it for a lot of things. It's connected to a lot of my tools for different things. It's connected to my Notion. It does a whole bunch. But on this day, this was just over 10 days ago now, I wanted to run an end-to-end GTM play starting with Signalbase. And I mentioned earlier how I have my own way of reaching out to customers. Who are my prospects? Who is my ICP? What is the service that I provide? So on and so forth. And the kind of the theme, let's say, of this one service is enrichment for GTM using this particular data set called NPI. And this is in the US healthcare context. I said, I want you to analyze this document, which has the entire context of here, let's just bring it over here. It has my service product description. Why do they care? My ICP and persona, the tool stack that could be used, and here's the product itself, what an operation looks like practically, what would they likely do instead of using my service. This ties into not only having the use case, but having a very well documented motion, reason, rationale, just were going to be the objections, so on and so forth. And that's all stored in here in my Notion. So this is where it's going to pull that. So it read it and it said, okay, here's the play I'm expecting to run. It's going to pull a high urgency signal from Signalbase. And this agent, again, is connected directly to Signalbase with the API. And it's going to identify pharma companies with an imminent commercialization window. So there were two plays. One of them was they're about to get FDA approval for a new drug. And the other one was there's a merger or an acquisition taking place in pharma. Then it would go and find these personas within these kinds of roles at those companies. The agent would research them, draft the personalized outreach, positioning this service as what they need right now, and then it would spit it out into Notion. And so it asked me some follow-up questions. It goes through, okay, so which signal type do you want to run? I said, let's do mergers and acquisitions. We'll pull new targets. We're going to use Signalbase 100% for the contacts as opposed to doing web research. And what was the output? Okay, so the output, I had it send everything back to my leads database in Notion, which I'm not going to share here, but this is what it executed on.
Sweet. One question here, because many people would say, oh, yeah, but you guys are using evergreen signals that everyone can have access to. What is your take on that?
Everybody has access to the same data. It's what you do with it that matters. So number one, evergreen. No, okay, so number one, I would say timing matters. So these signals that are available, and you know better than me, Georgie, I'm going to let you enrich my question, enrich my answer here. But here's what matters to me is when a signal like this comes through, I want my agent to be able to act on it immediately. So timing. Number two, it's what you do with that data, right? Because if the data is available to everybody, this is the same question that we've been answering forever now, right? It's just now Clay has, let's just talk about Clay, for example, right? This movement of democratizing access to data. If everybody has it, then does that mean that the market is automatically flooded? Yeah, now it's harder, right, to stand out. You have to be more specific. You have to be more focused about what you're doing and how you're doing it and why you're doing it. This comes back to the question of have you defined like like what exactly have you packaged your service or have you packaged your product into something that's so crystal clear to a very particular person, to a very particular type of company, to a person who works at that company? Have you contextualized it for them? Have you sharpened your messaging? Have you decided in that context, like what exactly is the data that you need in order to make your outreach meaningful? And is the way that you're using that data really, is it going through in a sharp way that is coming through with the lens of all of that preparation that you've done? If not, right? If everybody was still doing the spray and pray, then yeah, if one is still operating in that capacity, then the data is less impactful and it's less meaningful. So anyway, what do you think?
I think every evergreen signal should be used as a contextual tooling rather than straight intent qualification. Let's put it like this: like the amount of companies and amount of GTM teams who look at those signals and would still send a message such as congratulations on your role, congratulations on raising funding, etc., etc. That's not new. But what
Right.
is new is ultimately treating those as a way to sharpen your list further down the line,
Mm-hmm.
layer an additional qualification criteria, which you pretty much already did here. You defined via the agent what you look for specifically, and then based on that one, you layer further enrichments in Clay or any other data orchestration platform. Can be Cloud Code, can be Data Bar, whatever. But yeah, I think that's how people should approach those things. And I don't think those are also to be thrown away simply because of the fact that they do indicate, as you mentioned within the Clay Club session, the fact that someone have budget or they're going to have further movements on which you can capitalize upon.
Yeah, yeah. That's so a signal, let's just take this one that we're working with, a signal like mergers or acquisitions. It indicates like there is some kind of upheaval that's about to happen. There's some kind of chaos that's about to happen. And in preparation for that, the customer is going to be looking for, or your prospect is going to be looking for some kind of stability. Now, you provide a certain kind of stability. And when you bring all of that through that context of who you are, who you're talking to, why you're talking to them, and you think about it in, okay, so Jordan Crawford talks about his PQS and PVP framework. I'll just mention the PQS framework, part of it, excuse me, which is the pain qualified segment. The signal of mergers and acquisitions shows that there's a particular kind of pain which is about to be felt. There there are integrations that need to be made. There are systems that need to be reconciled or joined or merged. There are ERPs that are going to, maybe they need to start talking to each other. Maybe there's just going to be a full on migration. There's CRMs that are going to need to start talking to each other, or data that's going to need to be migrated from one to, I'm talking about from my perspective, right? Like how I come to this. And so, who is this person who is going to be feeling that pain? Who is the team within one of these companies that's going to be feeling that pain? And when you know, not just a signal, generally speaking, merger and acquisition, congrats on the merger, here's what I do. No, it's, I know you're going to go through a merger. I know that your systems are about to undergo some kind of integration. I know that the data is going to need to be reconciled. It's going to need to be cleaned up. It's going to need to be activated, and you're going to want to reduce your time to value, right? You're going to want to make sure you get to value as quickly as you can in this merger. And data integration issues are one of the biggest challenges in mergers and acquisitions in getting to value. Like a single delay just has compounding, sorry, a single delay in data integration has just like compounding issues for the remainder of whether it's done within the context, like inside the merger itself, or getting value thereafter. I know who's going to be feeling that pain. There is a qualified segment of people who are feeling that pain. And that is why this signal is meaningful to me.
Perfect. Okay, let's continue with the system. I think that was quite in depth. Just because of matter of time, let's get it going with the system.
Let's go. All right. So that is I talked earlier about how this was my just jump into, let me see what you can do. I'm just going to throw everything at it and I'm going to see what can you do. And that's exactly what it did. It just executed on the whole thing. You can see steps 1 through 5 here. It told me what the plan was. It's going to pull the merger and acquisition signals from Signalbase. It's going to find 10 contacts via job change signals, right? So in the merger or acquisition, whether it's because of that or otherwise, these are the people who are changing jobs at one of those companies. Then it's going to research the contacts and draft personalized outreach emails. Then it'll create those contacts as Notion records in my Notion database. And that's what it did. It built out, here, let's just look at it in here. So here were the top pharma targets. I think this one may not be the one with the Gilead deal. Here, I'll show on the screen the one that was the Gilead deal. I just had it. Oh, here it is. So this was from a post I put up on LinkedIn. And you can see in here, this Gilead acquired our selects at the end of February for $7.8 billion. And then it found people who worked there. It told me where it got all of the data and what each Notion record includes. I'm going to zoom in on this. Right. So Signalbase signal ID and the date, the deal context, the data reconciliation challenge that was specific to that deal, why the persona cares, a personalized outreach email with all of that context, and where it got all of the data from. So Viktor pulls from Signalbase, pulls from Notion, and then what I could do at that point is deploy it in Clay.
Sick. And how the next logical question that occurs from this is, okay, you set up a nice agent, right? But how do you actually execute on the rest of the flows? How do you design the whole strategic go-to-market approach towards closing those accounts?
Sorry, could you be more, how do I personally do that?
Yeah, okay, we build the agent. What is next? You mentioned K-Reach, Outreach via that, like a few platforms, etc., etc. But what is like a strategic way of how would you use that context or that information to do go-to-market for those companies?
The nice thing is that it has all of my context from Notion. And so all of the logic that I've prepared, all of the rationale, all of the goals that I've laid out for this play are already there in Notion. So when it queues up those emails for me, I go and I review those emails. And in this case, I was sending them manually because it's such a these are very large deals. And because they're very large deals, right? I take a more hands-on approach with revising the emails or even drafting the emails myself. And so there's this contact I have with them. And then after that, what can I do? I can put them into a sequence. I can engage with them on LinkedIn via comments. I can just make sure that I'm in their circle so I can follow them on LinkedIn. I can follow people that they engage with on LinkedIn, make sure that I'm active in their network. Not only is my direct messaging to them keeping me present in their mind, but also contextually they can see me in their environment as well. Is that heading in the direction of your question?
Yeah, totally. I think one of the best things there is perhaps you can actually make an event for those guys for drug development, right? Because
Mm,
they all have the same point of contacts. And here is where it doesn't only get GTM as a whole very complex, right? But it also on the tactical side, but on the strategic side too. Okay, now we have these accounts, right? We have the right context. Let's put them in one particular event so they can collaborate on that initial pain, and based on that you can follow along with, let's say, thought leadership ads to develop further along
yep.
like the whole proposition of why they need your initial solution or services based on that initial signal, which is the drug development, and it follows along down line where you initially would start, I think at least, I would run this every month or something. What is actually a good frequency for such workflow like this?
I would say it doesn't necessarily have to be run more than once a week. Timing, going back to what I was talking about, timing matters a lot. And being able to pick up on this, actually, Georgia, I laugh because you've done this twice now. You've posted about having a signal in Signalbase that is so fresh, companies have asked you to take it down because it wasn't supposed to be public yet. Is that right?
Yeah, 3 times over the month of March, by the way. So that's
Yeah.
crazy.
That's crazy. So timing matters a lot. This for me, like I think with the API, it costs me just like it doesn't cost very much from to call this API. I don't mind calling it every day. Being able to, if I have this streamlined and automated to take all of that context, right? I have Viktor, right? The agent send a poll from Signalbase, and if anything qualified comes through, then it puts it into my Notion. It doesn't cost me a lot to run that. So it doesn't matter if I run it every day.
Nice.
That's for me, myself.
Gotcha. Two
Yeah.
last questions because we're running out of time. Question number one would be if you need to scale this further, the system further, like this whole agentic system, right? How would you
Mhm.
do that? What would be the next step? Okay, like you got absolutely everything, but have you already thought about some improvements towards this?
Yeah, let's see if it's here. And we talked about human-led, system-led, agentic, autonomous orchestration. Talked about Viktor, scaling. Okay, we won't get into this too much, but yeah, there's this framework I'm sure many of you are familiar with, right? Having a use case to triage your use cases, to experiment with structured pilots, and then to slowly start to test and automate, build out reliable, repeatable agent workflows, and then make sure that you are measuring at the beginning and you're measuring at the end what you're measuring, what is the outcome that you were looking for to get out of automation, to get out of an agentic system, and make sure that the output data is showing you the results that you were looking for so you can go back and tweak your approach, tailor your approach. But yes, Georgie, I've put a lot of thought into what it would look like to scale this. And I'm going to stop sharing here for a second because I want to put something on the screen here. I would still have something like for me, I would still have something like Viktor at the top, but these systems that are available to us now, they are to a large extent self you give them all of your context and they are self-orchestrating in a sense. Let me make sure I pull this up here. And I want to demonstrate just a sample workflow that I put together that will scale this kind of play.
Was this for one of the clients or you just experimented on your own for it?
This was an experiment of like, how do you take this exact play? And I prepared it for this. How do you take this exact play and then say, all right, I want to scale this up to a company that wants to do this, not just with a solopreneur who's sitting in Slack with one agent, but is working with agent to agent, like multi-agentic systems and workflows. All right, so sharing.
By the way, guys, if you have any questions, drop them in the chat. We're going to dedicate the last 10 minutes to questions in case there are some things that you want to know. Maybe tech stack, strategic, tactical, doesn't matter. Just drop them in the chat and we'll answer them. Okay, there you go.
All right, so this is Octave. I like the way that they're framed here. AI runs on context. GTM runs on Octave. So every agent, workflow, and system knows exactly how to find the best customers because it has your ICP intelligence in this living context engine. Let's take a look at what that means in practice. So it starts with your resources. So these are all of the elements that we just looked at, right? So for the exact same play. And this is in my test environment. So I gave it the same context, and it, like in onboarding, it'll help you build out like what is it. It asks you, it interviews you to help fill out all of these fields. So what is it that you are doing in this service, right? This is a library, and this is the active service that I've created here. What does it do? What are the deliverables, competencies, like the comparative advantage, the likely alternative? Everything that you saw that I had in my Notion is here. What are the customer benefits, so on and so forth. And so with the context of my service, with the context of my target personas, with the target of my use cases, and the segments of what kind of customer, what kind of companies I would be looking for, it combines all of that with my own context, right? So I have my website here, and again, this is my test environment, but syncing your CRM, syncing your emails, your call transcripts, social outreach, and your knowledge base. Again, my Notion would go here as well. With all of this context, it knows the agents are able to operate from this central place, and your entire GTM stack connects to this. By the way, what I did earlier, I was playing with Viktor to see, all right, let me get Signalbase to trigger into this context with Octave and then play out the rest of this. So I think that would be a great step to add here as well. So with those resources, with those library elements, then you go and you create a playbook. And this playbook is, like your approach. How do you message this to your prospect? Okay.
And this is hyper-specific case by case, I assume. If now thinking about it, if you loop in Signalbase in it, every company is unique to the degree where, for instance, some biotech companies don't have in-house lab and others do. So if there is merger and acquisition that comes around, maybe there is an edge for you to add that extra personalization for the lab.
Yeah. Because in Octave also it will combine that, right, with web research. Let's take a look at the agents. Mm-hmm. And so you can design the agents from here, but actually better if we look at it from the workflow. All right. So here's just a sample, right? Each one of these is an agent. And so they go through and they go through their reasoning. Again, they're goal-oriented, but you can also combine this with conditions. You can combine it with logic. And so based on all of that context, you can have all of your products, you can have all of your services, you can have all of the different types of companies and people that you want to reach out to. And based on what Octave is finding, it will tailor your message and it will tailor your offer to that persona, to that person exactly. So you can design these workflows. You qualify the company for, so here I had to do it for a specific service, but it's highly flexible. It will find the right service for the right company, for the right person within that company. You enrich the person, further qualify, and then here I connected it to a 4-step cold sequence agent, What I realized at this point is the system can then just go, and I didn't finish the diagram for it, unfortunately, but the system at this point can do a handoff to Twain. Twain
Mm,
is gonna do a great job of designing of writing your copy, of tailoring it for email, tailoring it for LinkedIn, of coming across with this very human, very oh man, the way it writes with when you give it the right context is pretty amazing, and that's what they focus on. At that point with Twain, you would connect it to instantly, let's say, for example, for email, and you could connect it to HeyReach for LinkedIn campaigns. So that is what I think a broader pipeline, sorry, a scaled up version of this same play would look like in practice.
super sick. And if you put this into the shoes of the go-to-market teams out there, who will orchestrate absolutely all of this? And how many people you think should be involved in this whole chain of sequences
Ooh.
based on your own experience?
So this is such a how many people should be involved in this? I think if you have an existing team that's operating on your current processes and you're looking to implement something like this, you should see how few you can get away with implementing something like this. How few people can you get to orchestrate to manage this? And I'm really inspired by some people recently who have this operational rigor where they just say this is going to be hard.
Right.
It's just because you can do, and we talked about this before, George, just because you can do anything doesn't mean you should just go out and do it. Doesn't mean you should just go, let's go like implement agents, let's make an agentic system. No, move deliberately. Define what is your goal, define what is your current process, define what's your future state process. And if you have a team of 10, if you have a team of 12, and you have somebody, maybe you have somebody externally, or you have somebody dedicating like a quarter of their time, right, a quarter of an FTE to ideating through this, like how are we going to develop it? Have the operational rigor and the patience to say, how few people can we have managing this? And how much can we use agents to orchestrate this whole thing, to manage this whole thing with a human supervising and knowing, right? Going back to the architecture that we talked about at the beginning, knowing what is the design, knowing what are all of the steps, and knowing that when these agents are running, they're able to do this in a trustworthy way, in a reliable way. If you are trying to implement this at a larger company and you don't have the buy-in, you don't have transparency, and you have a bunch of people holding a bunch of different pieces of it, and without a clear roadmap, what you're asking for is failure. This is why there's this 95% cut of failure of implementing just all kinds of tools, because there's no transparency, there's no trust. This was like 10 years ago, I implemented something, and I think within 8 months, they turned it off and it was done. It was gone, even though it was very good. And why was
Mm.
that? It's because I designed it without transparency, without reliability, without somebody else other than me owning it, like in their head, the entire process. And that was a big learning for me. Is if you don't have the buy-in, don't do it. So as few as possible is my broad answer to that.
Is your answer? Yeah, awesome. This also reminds me to one case where someone wanted to book a call with us on GTM agency side. And what they said, funny enough, is that they turned off all of their signals because of the fact that it felt like noise, because of the fact that they did not manage to properly structure their signal based engine. So what you're
Hmm.
saying is exactly like in that direction, which is crazy to think that people will turn off something that is working simply because it feels overwhelming rather than working on optimizing for transparency, increasing better documentation, etc., etc. So I feel as a growth or go-to-market leader, it's your own responsibility to see that. If you try to onboard someone it should make sense to them too, how to navigate around that.
Yeah.
All right, we have 10 last minutes. I don't see any questions, but I do have two more, and they're going to be more rapid fire. At the end of the day, this is a live podcast recording. So, that being said, my two rapid fire questions are number one, what is your biggest hot take for the B2B go to market landscape at the moment?
My biggest hot take.
Yep. Let's call it strong.
I don't know if it's a hot take. I think it's one that people don't, we hear this all the time. And I think it's in so many ways, it's not getting through. And I think it comes back to operational rigor. So instead of a hot take, maybe I'll just call this my sharply voiced opinion, which is that data quality is so critical to everything that you're doing on top of this. And this really ties in with operational rigor. Have the patience to operate on the quality of your data. Have the patience for that. And when you are laying that solid foundation, when you know just even have the insight into what are the errors, what are the gaps, do an audit on it and have an understanding of where you are. Do you have a long ways to go? What can you operate with? People talk about like low quality data, and I think there are different understandings of it, the layers of it. I think the top, the easy one is just, okay, it's not enriched or it's not current, right? It's missing some key fields. You back down from that and it's duplicated or it's stale or some cleanup needs to be had there. You back down from that and it's just like, how many systems are you talking about? Are you talking about like an ERP with a CRM, with a data warehouse, with your MDM system over here that's supposed to be orchestrating the whole thing and unifying it? You've got your CRM, and all of these different sources over here need to be reconciled somehow. And then you have your customer data sets that are coming in externally, your distributor data sets and their claims and so forth that are coming in and need to be reconciled with all of that. If you try to layer an agentic system on top of that with no management of the foundations of your data, you're in for a lot of problems, and you're going to be in that 95% of failed AI implementations. So by all means, I would say sharply, focus on your data quality, make that a critical part of anything you try to build out on top of it.
Love that. And this actually goes nicely to what Everett from Clay said himself. Do pay attention to your enrichment chains because of the fact that if one thing breaks, everything breaks. There were a few tips, by the way, for the hands-on people within that particular episode. So make sure to go to YouTube and review that one. Super valuable conversation too. And one last question to wrap it up. What is an underrated advice that you can give to all of the go-to-market leaders out there? I'm bringing the fire to end it up. I know those are hard.
Underrated advice. Georgie, okay. Kick me off, Georgie. What would you say is an example of some underrated advice you've come across or you've experienced?
I like the switch. Okay, that's a good question. I saw what you did there.
Okay, all right.
You did there.
Underrated. I think we're putting too much pressure on this. I think underrated advice is boring advice.
I got one. Do you want to go first, or should I?
In a good way. Like the boring advice is the advice that you should focus on, and that is typically the underrated advice, the ones that really make a difference, right? Infrastructure, hard questions, documentation. This is boring. This is not sexy go-to-market, like excitement stuff. But if you want success out there, focus on the boring work that needs to be done to execute on all of that. Back to you.
I love that. Mine is a little bit more exciting though, and when it comes to following up, rather than, and this is something that I'm doing based on my own experience right now, the biggest reply rates that I have gotten and the best responses actually, which is speed to lead, I think, like the conversion metric ultimately, is the fact that number one, if you don't send these chunks of information about what you do, but you actually find an indirect way of how to allocate your value. So number one, if you have a very good product related post, just send that and mention that this might be interesting to them. And if you can actually tie it back to why this particular post is relevant to them, you manage to stand out significantly. I have someone who said hey, my account is blocked on LinkedIn using this one too. And I just send this profile, right? And I send this post to the founder with within my follow-up sequence. And that works pretty well. So this is exactly the type of tactics that I feel like people need to utilize a little bit more. So memes, mentioning posts, etc., etc.
Memes.
Yeah, they're to actually send messages that you would like to read. Let's put
Mm,
it like this. And nobody want to read this much. Give me one liner.
yeah. And you have to know your audience, right? Depends on what type of company you're talking to, depends on what type of person you're talking to. If you're talking to like more traditional, let's again, right, coming back to manufacturing, right? And you're talking to somebody who's probably much farther along in their career, got some maybe like an older person that might not land. But if you are talking to a startup out of San Francisco with all 20 somethings like that, immediately, right? That's the picture that tells 1,000 words and it has the full context of where that meme came from. And yes, that has a very good likelihood of connecting.
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, this was everything for this episode. We can probably continue talking about agents and go to market and signals and what works, what doesn't work from the LinkedIn snowball effect that we're all taking part of. But yeah, we gotta cut it short here. Let us know in the comments if you would like to hear more from me and Francesco. If there is anything else that you guys have as questions, do let us know and we'll jump right on it. I'll see you in the next episode. Chase.
Thanks, everybody.